Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here of the Liberty Weekly podcast, coming at you with episode 66 of the show, and that will be available at libertyweekly.net/66, along with the embedded video version of the show, as is the case and is the new normal for the show. All the show notes found with the video version embedded there. This is a emergency kind of broadcast episode. I don't mean to be too alarmist, but obviously in the background we have the new Syrian chemical weapons allegations being leveled against Assad. This is a story that has been unfolding over the weekend, and I really kind of contemplated really what to do this week in terms of episodes. I kind of feel like there's a lot of really good coverage, and I don't feel like my knowledge of the topic is good enough to really go in depth on that. So I'm going to be discussing that a little bit. This is supposed to be a shorter episode, but I kind of get into it and we'll see how long it is. So these are the newest developments that I'll just go through. Happening today on April 11th. Trump warns Russia missiles are coming at Syria after Moscow vows to shoot them down. And this is a repost of a Tyler Durden Zero Hedge article on Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. I'll include a link to this on the show notes page just so you can update yourself on everything that's unfolding currently. I just can't believe some of these tweets that Donald Trump is making, yet I can. And Donald Trump, the original tweet isn't in here, but let's see. He says, Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming nice and new and, quote, smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. And so I just wanted to point out that the United States is not adverse towards the use of chemical weapons. We supported Saddam Hussein in the 1980s in his war against Iran, in which he did use chemical weapons. Also, that war ended with the United States shooting down a commercial jetliner that is documented pretty well in Andrew Bacevich's book that I went through in Liberation Library 7, if I can find it here in the show notes page, right here. So I didn't go over the specific U.S. shooting down a civilian airliner from Iran, but that is documented in this great book that I talked about. So it's not just that. I mean, the United States has used Agent Orange in Korea and Vietnam, and people in Vietnam are still suffering the effects of that. The United States has used depleted uranium rounds in Mosul and other areas, and they've also used white phosphorus. And so we can't, what I'm trying to say is that we can't chastise anyone for using chemical weapons. I think you would be ignorant of history to make that point. So, I mean, and aside from that, the United States is also responsible for killing civilians in droves. I mean, Assad, and this allegation of chemical weapons is not proven at all, but I'll refer to this in a second, but Kyle Anzalone was talking about how, Assad has killed more civilians with conventional weapons than he has with chemical weapons. And I guess I could run through all the talking points about this. Assad is on the brink of succeeding in this war. It's been fought for a long time now, and he's on the verge of defeating ISIS and all these militant Islamic rebel groups. They've been cordoned off to some of the last suburbs in Damascus, and they're almost on the brink of defeat. It makes absolutely no logical or tactical sense why Assad would decide to use chemical weapons against his own people. It just doesn't make sense. And it's very convenient for Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States. And this chemical attack is unproven. It was put up by the White Helmets, which are a MI6 related to MI6, Britain's intelligence agency. And so I could go on, and I said that I wouldn't, but here I go. So just to get since I alluded earlier that I am not, the foremost expert on foreign policy, I'm still learning. I'm trying to get caught up there. But I would point everyone towards this excellent episode that Kyle Anzalone did with Will Porter. Everything you need to know is in there, according to what's happening, currently unfolding in Syria. Let me play a little snippet here just from the beginning to outline the situation.
All right, Will, you ready to get into this mess?
Yes, I am.
All right. So what's going on here is that on April 7th, there was alleged chemical weapons attack in Douma, Syria. This is a suburb of Damascus, the last remaining neighborhood that was the rebel enclave in eastern Ghouta. This has been a months-long brutal fight for the Assad regime that at times saw the Assad and Russian governments killing 1,000 people, over the course of about 10 days, I believe. They were killing at about a rate of 100 people a day. And so this has been awful, brutal fighting. But many of the rebel groups have surrendered, and there's also been a lot of shelling from the rebel groups into Assad held territory, killing civilians. So I don't want to, dismiss that fact, and I'm not trying to start out this show smearing Assad, but this is a very brutal and ugly situation going on there. Douma, the rebel group there, is has a relationship, and they're Wahhabist. I believe the founder or the leader of that group has called for the death of all the Alawites in Syria. So this is in no way a moderate Syrian rebel group. Prior to the April 7th attack, some evacuations of Syrian rebels and their fighters have begun, and their families have begun, and they were moving to the Idlib province of Syria. But those had halted, and then you had this chemical weapons strike on April 7th. The strike was alleged to have occurred when an Assad helicopter pushed a tube carrying chemical weapons out of a helicopter and fell onto a building or a structure of some kind. And then there were people sheltering in the basement. And depending on reports, you see either dozens were killed and hundreds were wounded, 40 were killed and 50 were wounded, or you had the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights just saying 80 people suffocated to death in a basement. And so that, from my knowledge, Will, that's about all we know about the attack. Am I missing anything there?
No, I think you pretty much covered what's common knowledge about this. And now, of course, lots of claims, lots of unsubstantiated arguments and claims are being made about the Russians and the Assad regime's culpability here. But as usual, as we've seen, it's sort of a pattern emerging. We don't get a lot of supporting evidence for that, just a lot of claims.
Right. And have you noticed anything about these attacks that would make, because I haven't really been able to identify if people are making the claim that this was a chlorine attack, but because I've heard several witness reports say that they smelled chlorine. But then at the same time, the Western media sources seem to just blindly be saying it was a sarin attack. So it's very hard to tell, maybe even what's going on here.
Yeah, I think I have seen explicit mentions of sarin. Now, of course, there's all kinds of claims about chlorine attacks all the time in Syria. But yeah, I think this one they're saying was like an organophosphate like sarin instead of like a chlorine.
Right. And then it's also confusing as they say that the attack was on a hospital, but these people died in a basement. And at least from the pictures of the, scene where the attack was alleged to have happened, it doesn't appear to be a hospital. It looks like, some kind of bunker somewhere.
Yeah, I almost wonder if in that case, if they're conflating like conventional strikes in the hospital and then just like also talking about the chemical weapons thing as part of the same sort of offensive or what. But yeah, I've seen a sort of the same kind of inconsistency. The images we see don't appear to be a hospital. It looks like a residential setting.
Right. And that was kind of what I had interpreted the initial reports to have said, was that there were 80 people killed in Douma on April 7th. 40 of those people suffocated to death. Believed to be of chemical weapons, and then another 40 people were killed in separate Assad, not U.S. coalition, but Assad coalition strikes, either Assad or Russia. So that seemed to be the case to me, in that those strikes may have been on the hospital.
Right.
All right, and I will link to a Moon of Alabama article that I think does the best job that I've seen so far, summarizing what the evidence is and calling into question some of the video evidence with some pictures that you can see out there. The next interesting note in this story is that on April 8th, pretty much immediately, you have Donald Trump coming out and sending some threatening tweets towards Assad and calling him an animal. I broke this down in the last episode of the podcast. I'm sure this will already be a long episode. So if you're interested in that, go back and check out 178. But here's...
Okay, well, I'll leave that in the show notes page for everyone to go and check out the rest of that episode. Obviously, Kyle and Will are doing such great work. Kyle was just on the podcast. I'll also link to that Moon of Alabama article, but go listen to this. I also wanted to make the point of pointing out that before this chemical weapons attack happened, a few days before it, or alleged chemical weapons attack, excuse me, Kyle was on my show and we were talking about the situation in Syria. And at that point, we were most, or at least I was most worried about Turkish and U.S. forces facing off in northern Syria around Manbij. And that's still, that's still happening. This is so convoluted. But one thing that we did go over was Nikki Haley. In this episode, before the chemical weapons attack, a few days before it, Nikki Haley was in front of the UN Council issuing a new warning over Syria chemical weapons attacks. And let's just go through that article again here. This was April 4th, just a few days before this chemical weapons attack, alleged chemical weapons attack. And Nikki Haley is beating the war drums, warning that there is that there will be an impending chemical weapons attack. So just an interesting little nugget there. I'll include this in the show notes page as well. And of course, Nikki Haley reiterates that Washington remains prepared to act if we must on Wednesday against the use of chemical weapons right here. Even as the Security Council has remained deadlocked, some have stood up to demand accountability for the use of chemical weapons, Haley said. The General Assembly overwhelmingly approved the creation of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism on Crimes Committed in Syria, which is collecting evidence for future prosecutions. So, yeah, you get that side of it. But the main point of this episode that I wanted to get at and why this is an emergency broadcast of sorts is because now more than ever, we need to call our representatives. And I'm an ANCAP. I'm a voluntaryist. I do not believe in the myth of political representation because it's just that. It's a myth. But let it not be said that we sat here on our thumbs, shitposting on the internet and doing nothing to stop this, to try and stop this. I mean, even if it is a myth, even if it is a farce and there's the Oz behind the curtain, we need to do something. We have to do something. We can't just call here and not contribute, whether it's going on the street corner with a sign saying hands off Syria or whether it's calling your representatives or calling the White House. Do something. And to all the ANCAPs out there who would criticize me, I don't think that I'm going past my morals here. All I'm doing is you don't even have to register to vote. You just call and sometimes you have to give an address, sometimes you don't. But you just call and you say, hey, I'm so-and-so. And politely do this because you'll get more persuasive traction that way. But just call and say, hey, the United States has no business in Syria. We have overthrown secular dictators in the past, and it results in absolute carnage and chaos. No secular dictators are not great. They do terrible things in their own right, but at least they provide some kind of security that will prevent all-out carnage that we have seen in Libya, we've seen it in Iraq, and we've seen it in Syria now. And we need to do whatever we can. So I'll include this link in the show notes page, callyourrep.co. Enter your mailing or not your mailing address, but just your zip code, and it will tell you who your representatives are. You call them. The call will last less than 40 seconds. All you do is get on, say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I oppose U.S. military interventionism in Syria. It's a bad idea. Thank you very much for hearing me. Please pass this on to the representatives. And I don't have any delusions that this will make a significant change, but if we all do it, they figure that for every one person that calls, there's 100 or 200 or 300 people that feel the same way. Call your local offices, too, because they are more receptive. Of course, the representatives are more, at least the House representatives are more concerned about their local constituency. So please give them a call. Make your voice heard. I called this morning. I called all the representatives for Wisconsin and all the reps for Minnesota, and I told them politely, please, hands off Syria. Do not commit us to a world war. I think this is very important. In 2013, Obama tried to do the same thing. And in fact, last year there was a chemical attack that, as we all know, resulted in Donald Trump launching 59 Tomahawk missiles, most of which missed, but at a Syrian air base. In 2013, Obama tried to do the same thing after a alleged chemical attack. And the United States, everyone stepped up and said, no war in Syria. There was a big outcry. We need to step up again. and I created a few posts. I did on Facebook. Let's see. I'll bring up Facebook real quick. Apologies if there's any kind of like notification dings or anything like that. But if we get here in the Liberty Weekly podcast group on MeWe, I created this post. Please feel free to copy the script. Like I said, I'm still working out the details of all of this. And just share this post, the one on MeWe. Also, I created one on Facebook as well. You can find it in the Liberty Weekly podcast group. And I think it's worth it. Share around. It's a normie-friendly version, and so it contains some status language, so forgive me for that. However, it's too important not to. So I think that's everything that I have here today. And I think I would just encourage everyone to call your representatives. It's very important. Like I said, check out... sorry for all the screen changing here. I'm just trying to get organized. Check out the Foreign Policy Focus episode. Also, here is... I've been listening to the Cato Institute podcast recently, just some topics. Obviously not as good as the Mises Institute, who I support clearly. However, they have this podcast, POTUS Lacks Authority to Strike in Syrian Quagmire. So for what it's worth, check out that episode. I listened to it briefly. There wasn't a whole lot of substance to it, but it kind of outlines the issue as well. So thanks, everyone. This was episode 66 of the podcast, libertyweekly.net/66. Also, don't forget, you can support me on Patreon and get great bonuses and more intimate access to the show. You also get bonuses like access to my personal meme cache, which has like 1,000+ memes growing. You can also check out the Rothbard repository, which has time-stamped and searchable indexed repository of Murray Rothbard lectures. There's other bonuses like extras. I had like 30 minutes extra from that conversation with Kyle. We talked about things outside foreign policy. There's also, other conversations that I have that I throw up. Here's a bonus episode that I did just for my patrons, just about more to life than liberty. So check that out. Also check out libertyweekly.net/Amazon. That's our Amazon affiliate link. You can do your regular Amazon shopping. Please don't forget that. I get gift cards that help me buy books for the show. I really appreciate that. It really helps me out. Also, shout out to DT, who is our newest patron. He pledged at a level of $10 per month. Thank you so much, man. DT's a good friend that I've made through the show just recently, so shout out to him. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll check you later. Have a good week, everyone, and be sure to call your representatives.